want to introduce you, everybody, to Dr. Feras Batarseh. He is a research assistant professor at George Mason University in the College of Science. We've had a great conversation with him so far. Very interesting work in data science, artificial intelligence, and context-aware systems. He's going to be talking to us today about his book, Data Democracy, but we actually had quite a big discussion on using AI to understand trade behaviors as well as other economic behaviors. He does this as part of his role at as a director of the Turing Research. It's an AI policy group at George Mason that not only supports his research work, but also supports developing policies around AI for the federal government. He's also interacted with the Federal Reserve Bank as well as national trade policy groups. So just a couple of ground rules. If I'd appreciate it if you could stay on mute up until the end of his talk. He's going to talk to us for most of the hour, but then leave time at the end that we can ask some questions. The two methods for asking questions today, of course, you can, at the end when we're taking questions, you can then unmute and ask your question, or if you prefer, you could type it in the chat and I will ask it for you. So with that, go ahead and pass it over to Feras, and I'm excited to hear about your work. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Sterling. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here, happy to be presenting to a company of such high caliber. I wish we were together in person doing this, but maybe in the future we will do something like that. I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and... Okay, so this talk is concerned with data democracy, and I want to begin with a definition of data democracy. So, and a very simple one. So, data democracy is a framework of values and actions that benefits data owners and the public. And I want to focus on values and actions. I want to focus on those two words. Because throughout my talk, you will realize why a framework of values is very important for data democracy. So this is not only a technical topic. It is a topic of national interest. It is a topic of interest at a company such as yours. It is a topic on a personal level with our relevant to our internet freedoms and to our digital liberties and so on and so forth. And so, like Sterling mentioned, I'm presenting on behalf of Turing Research. We're a group of researchers at George Mason University, and we work with data science and AI for policy making. All right, so this is a quick agenda of today's talk. So we'll begin by talking about the world's newest country, and that's not South Sudan as it is geographically, but we're going to be talking about a new data republic that is emerging everywhere. And we'll present some concepts around that. And then I have, throughout the years working with multiple governmental projects and so on, I realized that there are three major myths of data that I aim to present today and hopefully have discussion with you all. All right, so I want to begin with in the first section, the world's newest country. I want to begin with the data question, okay? And for that, I'll read to you this paragraph that was written about data, and then I would aim to touch on it throughout. So. All right, so the paragraph goes like this. And this was written a long time ago, and it shows clear vision and clear promise to what data is and presents the data question. So, all right, so day by day, it becomes more evident that the data we happily possess in excellent quality and abundance are the mainspring of modern civilization. Data, in truth, stand not beside, but entirely above all other commodities. It is the main material of the country and the factor in everything we do. And I think we all can relate to that. Everything we do is a data point. Every bank transaction, every email, every tweet, every post, everything we do is a data point that gets saved somewhere, right? With such facts before us, it can be no matter of surprise that year by year, we make larger collections upon a material of such myriad qualities, of such miraculous powers. If we at present possess a certain leading and worldwide influence, it is not due to any general intellectual superiority, but to the union of certain mental qualities and our data resources. It needs but a little reflection to see that the whole of our present vast industrial system and its consequent production of data has chiefly risen from successive measures of economy. No one must suppose that data thus are spared, that profits gained soon lead to extended employment in many new forms. The several branches of industry are closely interdependent, and the progress of any one leads to the progress of all. So you might think that the author of such paragraph about data is someone who's familiar with data science or familiar with the life cycle of a data science or the importance of data and so on. However, this was written in 1865. This paragraph was written in 1865 by William Stanley Jevons. However, I've lied to you. I've took his paragraph and changed one word. In 1865, William Jevons wrote this about coal. So in his book called The Coal Question. And I took this paragraph and I replaced the word coal in every single occurrence of it with the word data. And so when I did that and I read the paragraph, it sounded perfectly sound. And it sounded perfectly reasonable to what data is today for us. Now, if you're familiar with the picture of the gentleman on the right, obviously the gentleman on the left is William Jevons, and the gentleman on the right is Milton Friedman. He's a world-renowned economist and a Nobel Prize laureate. He discussed the coal question, but at his time, he was talking about oil. So what Jevons did is he addressed the coal question that way. Then Milton Friedman took the same discussion, the same argument, and applied it to oil. And what I'm doing today is I stole Jevons' paragraph and I replaced the word coal with data. And the result is that throughout time, we can obviously see how certain commodities dictate powers of a country, dictate certain aspects of governance within a country. And we all heard the statement, data is the new oil. So data is plural, so I want to say that are the new oil, but that's the famous old motto. And so a company like Noblis, I'm sure you're very aware of this competition and very aware of the setup. The biggest data-driven, biggest data deals throughout the last 5 to 10 years have been driven by big companies trying to acquire smaller companies, not for their software, not for their service, but for their data. If we think of Facebook acquiring WhatsApp, if we think of Microsoft acquiring LinkedIn, and we're talking about obviously billions of dollars, and many, many more deals. We're hearing in the news today about Microsoft trying to purchase sub-own TikTok and so on. And so in this day and age, data has certainly we're past the hype. We're past the using the buzzwords for marketing purposes and using the word machine learning and AI just for the hell of it. And we're at a point where, as nations, we have to decide how data can present hope to our citizens and how data can present hope to humanity in general. So the data question is the question of this time. And I certainly believe that anything else is at this point is really noise, but addressing the data question is very important. I'm sure if some of you have watched or read the latest congressional hearing with the big tech, Facebook and Microsoft and Apple and Google, talking about data privacy rules and talking about monopolies and antitrust rules within the government and so on. All right, so I want to do a quick poll, okay? But before I go on, I want to do a quick poll, and I want to invite you to, if you can see my screen, I want to invite you to respond to this question. Which category do you fall in, A, B, or C? So A is, I would like to own my data. You know, we all have, we are all data producers, right? And one of the biggest jobs in the future will be data learners and trainers. You train the models, you help training the models to produce better results. But until we get there, at this point, we're all data producers. We produce data in so many different shapes and forms. But most of the time, we don't own that data. We can't even have access to it in most cases of the data that we own, that we create, that we should have access to, and we should have the right to control what gets out there and what doesn't, and so on. So out of A, B, and C, which category do you fall into? Respond to this poll real quick. We'll give it a couple minutes. You can text, as you can see, to this number. And then once you join, you can choose A, B, or C. Or you can respond, go to this link, paulev.com /FERASBATARSE 237. And, oh, can I see the poll? Okay. Can see the poll. Sorry, let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. Content. All right, here's the poll. All right, thank you for letting me know. Can you see the poll now? Okay, so awesome. Thank you, Natalie. So the data question, right? So which category do you fall into? Are you, I would like to own my data. That includes having legal rights to it and complete control over it. Or you can say, I don't mind if my data is collected or are collected. That will keep me safe and secure. And I care about my safety and security, and I'm being protected, so I don't care. Or you can say, I don't care about data or technology at all, which if you work at Noblis, you should care about technology. I want to live on a ranch and just record TikTok dancing videos and move on with my life. So please, go ahead. And we will see how this result unveils. It's obviously anonymous, so we can't tell. No one can tell if your answer. Please go ahead and answer. Let's take a quick poll. I'll give it a couple minutes, and then we can proceed. All right, so I think this poll can take up to 200 answers, which I think that should cover it. I don't know how many attendees we have today, but all right. And if in my presentation I deviated you away from C, by all means, go ahead. I didn't mean to introduce any bias into your decision, but I am happy to see the results so far. All right. All right, beautiful. So I will go to the slide. So we have 75%. We have 75% for A, and we have. Let me go back to my slides. We have 24%. 76% for A and 24% for B. And can you see my screen? Okay, beautiful. So we're back to the slides. I hope you can see that. I can see the comments. If you can't see the slides, please write. So beautiful. I'm happy to see this this response. Very very well aware, smart people. I love it. So I interestingly enough, I've been doing this poll for the last, I want to say, 5 years. And when I began doing this poll, the answers I was getting, it was always been, it's always been leaning more with time towards A. So when 5 years ago, there were a bunch of C's, many B's, and few A's. And then 4 years ago, more A's and less B's and C's. 3 years ago, even more, and so on. And now we get 75%, 25%. That's fair. Although I would love to hear from you on keeping, for those who chose B, why you think that is, given that if you share your data and it gets hacked, then you're really shooting yourself in the foot and you're not really being protected. But and obviously, I see some comments, and obviously there are many ways that the poll could be performed. We can have many more options, less options, But the idea here is that, in this day and age, data drive change, and computational intelligence is king. Truth, if we're looking for truth, and as humans, we're always pursuing truths in many different topics. And as citizens of a country, the United States, we're always looking at how policies that are performed or presented by the government or by state governments or by any other legislative body of governance, how these policies affect us and how they affect what we do on a daily basis. And so data democracy is the antidote to the exacerbating and continuous lack of our online liberties. And I'm not presenting a political topic today. I'm not presenting any even social opinion. I'm not a social scientist. I'm a data scientist and a researcher. But you can't help but see through practices of data democracy and data science that data ought to be owned by its creators. Okay, and proposed resolutions for a more perfect data democracy include open data, open software, ethics in AI, data imbalance solutions, and so on. So all of the solutions are presented in the book that I'm partly presenting today, Data Democracy. And I believe you all get an e-copy of this book shared across your organization. The problem with openness, openness offers itself with high accountability. So it's very difficult to accomplish. It's a merit-based system, and it's often challenged with lack of structure and organization. And that's partly why so far it's partly been I want to say it's incrementally succeeding, but it's still on the failing side. It hasn't been prevalent enough. And so structures such as openness, data openness, emerge to hierarchies. And when in a data democracy, when you have a hierarchy, owners of structured data will eventually have more power over users of that data. Will eventually become what I call in the book data tyrants. And creators of insights are also, for example, creators of insights, builders of data visualizations. They're also high in this hierarchical order of a data republic. And so data democracy does not guarantee equality of outcome. It does not. But it creates a novel playing field that is equal and fair and ensures equality of opportunity and accessibility to all of its members. So although it's obviously virtual, the world's newest country, the Data Republic, eventually transformed into a physical national representation of the country. Politically, it would replace experience and wisdom in policymaking. If you look at how government works and how policies are created, they're usually based by either bias towards a certain party or political experience or even personal benefits in some cases. With a fair data democracy, that won't be the case. Economically, data will replace traditional metrics such as the gravity models and other laws of supply and demand and so on. For example, if you think of supply and demand in a world of a data democracy, virtual bits could be replicated infinitely, and they could be sold without being affected by a scarcity of demand or lack in supply. Elections, political struggles, warfare, technological advancements, and many other aspects in such a democracy will be driven by data processing, producing knowledge, creating intelligence, and so on. So the book that I'm talking about today, we're scratching at the surface with data democracy, honestly. But I aimed, and with the co-authors, one of which is part of Noblis, Abhinav Kumar. He worked with us, and he was part of our team, and he has contributions in this book. And we aim to present a manifesto to data democracy and a constitution to a data-driven world that we all live in. If you look at this map, for example, I chose this map because it's interesting how you data presentation, right? This map is how maps are presented in China, where they like to present their country in the middle of the world, right? That's why they shift the view, and the West is not the West anymore, and the East is not the East anymore. They like to place themselves right in the middle. Obviously, maps in the West that were initially created by the British and so on are you have the Pacific Ocean on the west side, and you have the Atlantic Ocean in the middle, so it's different. But that's the world news country, a data republic. Now, I want to declare this warning: this book, this presentation, this was done before the coronavirus, and the implication of this virus is not only medical and healthcare and so on, but it's also very relevant to data democracy, because during such outlier events, we all heard about the models from the U.S. CDC, right, and WHO and other organizations. Their predictions were way off. Their models were way off, useless. The reason is that those models were built with limited data, without looking into external factors. In AI, we do research in context, and context is the setup that you are in when you are taking a decision. Now, we all know we're in an event, we're in a talk, and so we're home within a certain, your own name, your colleagues' names, geographically where you are. You have so much information that forms your context. And so that knowledge, you take decisions accordingly based on that context and based on that knowledge. Machines don't function that way. Obviously, we have to inject context into machines so they can take decisions. And so, therefore, in the world of context, we say that data collection and the data used for decision making is infinite. What you had for breakfast this morning could affect your performance at work. If you had an argument with your partner last night, that would affect your performance today, and could be negatively, could be positively, who knows, right? And so context is infinite. Everything could be leading to everything. There are very high correlations between different hidden insights that we don't know about. And so with the coronavirus and with such other outlier events, the price of misinformation during a catastrophe can only be comprehensively measured in retrospect. It is important to not dumb down the metrics of success in such cases or failure to the total of so for example, if we look at the number of COVID cases and so on, it was very imperative to achieve an equilibrium between national productivity, the economy, efficiency of the healthcare system, and so on. And so we can't manage what we can't measure, which is famous software engineering golden rule. And if our only metric during such times is a number, like a number of cases and so on, then we are certainly doomed to fail. And therefore, data collection was a major failure during the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the problem that we're still facing is that there's the tobacco and data paradox. I connected back to the tobacco paradox of the 90s, where data governing bodies today, they're pushing regulations to maybe help us contain our privacy, help us control our privacy, and so on. But those are opposite to each other. And I'll give you an example. Just like how it was in the 90s, where the government would spend money to subsidize tobacco farmers, but at the same time, they spend money on funding health programs and for respiratory patients and patients that have been smokers. They spend money for banning smoking even. They have programs to ban smoking and so on. But at the same time, government spends money to subsidize tobacco farmers. That was in the 90s. Same thing with data now. Governments are trying to regulate the Googles and the Facebooks to minimize the collection on the citizens, to give citizens the rights to data, just like Europe and GDPR regulations. But at the same time, they are contracting with the companies, government that is, the government is contracting with those companies to gather data for face recognition and behavioral trends of citizens and so on. So it's a paradox. If a governing body is trying to protect us from tobacco, in parentheses, data, then they shouldn't incentivize such practices. And at the same time, they should control how they benefit from such. So it's a very difficult paradox and something certainly worth discussing. To get more towards into the details of the 3 myths of data, I will begin with the first myth, where science is objective. We always hear about science and how it's very objective and very true, and it's the truth and it's facts and so on. Well, I want to begin with this story. If you're familiar with Aaron Swartz was an MIT student in the early 2000s. There's a movie called The Internet's Own Boy. I encourage you to watch it. I think it's on Amazon Prime. Internet's Own Boy, Aaron Swartz. He took a stab at creating a repository. He collected all the scientific papers into one repository, and he published it online freely. Now that was because he was part of a university. As you know, if you're part of a university, you can download publications and papers at will, and he collected them. He wrote a software that would go through and collect millions of papers, and he put them on a free repository online. And he created what's called the Open Access Manifesto. He was sued by publishers. He was Internet's Own Boy was sued, and he he was federally prosecuted. And unfortunately, his story didn't have a fruitful or happy ending. He had two counts of fraud. Eventually, he committed suicide in 2013. Now, I wrote an article about open science 5 years ago, and I mentioned Aaron Swartz. And his mom saw my article, and she sent me an email saying, "I saw your article about Aaron Swartz, and we thank you for raising his issue, talking about his issue, and so on." So I invited her to be at that point. We were still working on the book. I invited her and her husband to write something for the book, write a note, a dedication. And if you look through the PDF file that you're getting, they wrote how Aaron was brought up, and they gave us a page. They were very generous, and we included their page in a dedication to Aaron Swartz and his work in open access. His movement is still alive, and many publishers now, they are looking into creating an open access dimension to scientific publication. A very slow progress, but nonetheless progress. Now, luckily these days, historically speaking, science has been captured by presentations and talks and so on. These days, scientists, we have many venues where we can claim ownership and declare victory on problems and publications, and through publications in journals and conference proceedings and surveys and studies and all that kind of stuff, right? Now, in the scientific area or in academia, the motto is publish or perish. So you have to publish a lot. We have to keep publishing. And so that obviously drives many meaningless and pointless publications. And historically speaking, data for experiments used in those publications have not been shared with the readers. Now it's getting more common to share that data, but it's not still at the level that it needs to be. So there's this, Nature, one of the top prime publishers, they presented this study that they showed that 65% of experimental results in journal articles cannot be reproduced. 75% of medical studies suffered from a false positive outcome. Can you imagine? Especially medical studies. There's this, everything you know is wrong. There's this, scientists are wrong all the time, and that's fantastic. You see these headlines, and it's fascinating where most published research findings are not able to be reproduced, or they're not true, which is, we base our lives and decisions on science, and we base our policies on science. If we think of many topics such as climate change and medical decisions, and even during this time of a pandemic, we base our decisions on science. And so if science is 65% wrong due to the lack of data, due to the lack of data democratization, that's why I'm connecting the dots here for you. We're talking about data being democratized so everyone can have access to it, so everyone can approve or disapprove of such studies. And so, for science, it has to be open. And for science to be open, there are 6 pillars. It's not only open data. Data democracy is one aspect, but you can think of open science and open access, open code, open source, open annotation. There are multiple venues of openness that would describe and present all the information required to reproduce an experiment, reproduce scientific study, and eventually reproduce the truth. There are some silver linings. There are some systems here and there in Europe and in the US and all over the world. Many countries of the world now are performing open data initiatives. And if you go to data.gov, you'll get data from the government that's openly available to all the public, and so on. Many countries like Australia and countries in Europe like Germany and France and other countries present their data publicly to their citizens. So there are a few silver linings. There are many open AI centers and programs, and all cities now in the US, most of the big ones, Open Data Chicago, Open Data New York, Open Data DC, they publish their data publicly, and so we can look at the data, and you can only imagine how an economist would look at the data of a city and present their own results, present their own argument. I mean, they might be right, they might be wrong, but if we have an open argument, then we stop the monopoly of science to certain publishers or certain universities, such as the Ivy Leagues and so on, where not the entire public has access to such knowledge and science. So that was the first myth. The second one, numbers don't lie. That's the second myth. I like to say that numbers don't lie, but liars use numbers. There's a famous book called How to Lie with Statistics, and I'll mention it in a second. I want to present one of my major inspirations, Kurt Gödel. Kurt Gödel is a very famous scientist. He was known for developing an appetite for even baby food and laxatives and so on. But he's a paranoid scientist where he was hyper attentive to details around him. And such scientists are laser focused on their context. And Kurt Gödel presented the incompleteness theorem. The incompleteness theory is the first wave of theorems that challenged formal systems. He challenged mathematics. Kurt Gödel challenged how we do mathematics. And he completely proved it. He completely broke it down into why mathematics, with the way it is right now, cannot prove itself. The importance of his theory, though, is that it is inherently applied to other fields. His theory could be applied to math and physics and chemistry and obviously computer science and data science. And so if you think of examples like when you think of politics and examples like gerrymandering and other types of bias, right? Mathematics has inherited bias within it, its own theories and methods. And I encourage you to read this book, How to Lie with Statistics, if you have it, or even check it out. You can find it online for free. It's an old book, but it looks at different biases and skews and outliers and how data, if imbalanced correctly, could lead to results that are not only inaccurate but also opposite to reality and the truth. The Simpsons paradox is a famous example. I'm not going to go through it today, but I invite you to check it out as well. Here are some images that I took from the book, How to Lie with Statistics, and for outliers, and if you look at the image in the bottom left, and you can tell this is a very old book. But if you look at the image in the bottom left, how much the values on the y-axis, determine what you see in this graph, right? So this is a 1937 graph. It's a monthly data. We can see the government payrolls going up on the image on the left, right, or in the bottom left of the screen. But the one right next to it shows that government payrolls are stable. But that depends on the values on the y-axis. If you change the y-axis, you'll get a different result. And so, unfortunately, newspapers, for example, the sad reality is that they cherry pick. They cherry pick inaccurate studies, and they profit-driven media organizations and others sometimes find their way into conventional wisdoms and become producers of inaccuracy and there's the famous green jelly beans cause acne study that was actually published by multiple newspapers, where someone did an experiment with jelly beans, and he would every time he eats green jelly beans he'd get acne, but when he eats other colors he wouldn't. And obviously that's a absurd correlation, but it was actually picked up by multiple media outlets, and the 1 hour at the gym is equal to 1 glass of wine or stuff like that, where it's totally absurd, but it really blinds our path forward in so many aspects. If you look at the top right image, it's a simple example that, let's say that milk cost 20 cents a quart last year, right? I mean, this is how you look at the data, from which angle, from which perspective, leads to a different decision. Even in this graph, it shows how you can say that prices are up or prices are down. And you can imagine the types of economic policies that get influenced by such visualizations, right? And so it's a simple example, but if you look at this year, milk is down to a dime and bread has gone up to a dime. Now, if you consider last year as a base period, making the prices of that time 100%, right? Since the price of milk has since dropped to half, which is 50%, the price of bread has doubled, which is 200%. The average of those two changes is 125%, which would tell you that the prices have gone up by 25%. But if you try this again and look at the breakdown, slice and dice the data differently, and take this year as base period, milk used to cost 200% as much as it does now, and bread was selling for 50% as much as it does. The average, the prices used to be 25% higher than they are now, and so you get a totally different answer. The solution, obviously, there are mathematical solutions that use geometric averages and use either period as the base, which is different than the arithmetic average or the mean. But but if you look at this graph, it's perfectly legitimate. I mean, you're not lying. You're presenting the data in a way that shows inaccuracy. So you can do it either way, depending on your agenda or depending on other aspects, right? And so, there are many examples in this book, and it really goes through the details of how statistics can be so deceiving in so many ways. And so, be careful when you read a number, when you read a graph, and look at it, that in some cases, numbers are presented in a way that are inaccurate. And so the third myth that really is usually my first part of any AI class that I teach is this recent type of overhyping and underdefining AI. Where if we go back to the origins of AI, obviously Alan Turing, father of AI, or even the father of computer science, he wrote his famous paper, and he presented 9 objections to intelligence. And during the 80s and the 90s and even the 70s, I mean, this is the 1950 paper, but 60s, 70s, and 80s, AI researchers were looking at those 9 objections. The objections are theological in nature, they are mathematical in nature. There's the Lady Lovelace objection, which Lady Lovelace in the 1800s, she's deemed to be the first computer programmer. She claimed that machines are incapable of originality. That notion stayed valid until the 50s, until Turing wrote his paper, and he was challenging that notion. And so those forms of AI as we know it today, however, recently, with the rise of data and big data, that's changed, and that deviated away from those AI principles into big data and looking at historical data, producing machine learning and deep learning and reinforcement learning models to present predictions and forecasts and classifications and so on. So I want to make sure that terminology is clear, where we are not talking about, when we talk about AI, we're talking about those non-objections. We're talking about machine learning, we're talking about algorithms of classification, clustering, and regression that predict and forecast and classify and cluster and associates data, historical data sets to present results and to present help decision-making aspects. And so, are we using AI? In some cases we are. In most cases we are not. And we are, and that's, scientists have disagreed over this, but it is strongly believed that most of what you do now is data science and not AI. Obviously, AI has multiple branches, multiple fields, expert systems. If you look at it right in the middle, that was the popular child of AI in the 90s, where we refer to it as the AI winter, where scientists gave up on AI, gave up on the notion that intelligence is possible in a machine, and that human intuition and human feelings and emotions are much more complicated to be reduced to a model or to something that could be embedded into a machine. There are obviously multiple classes of learning. I'm not going to go through this. And if you work in machine learning, if you work in data science, you're very well familiar of supervised and unsupervised and deep learning methods and other different sub branches. Okay, so I think I might be running out of time, but I'll maybe reach a conclusion where machines have better narrow intelligence than humans, and check out this movie as well, AlphaGo, where a machine was able to, a deep mind Google machine was able to beat the world champion in AlphaGo. Obviously, the famous Kasparov 1996 defeat by IBM's Deep Blue. And AI paradigms are different. They function differently. Deep learning is used for images and audio files and bigger media databases and so on, while machine learning is used for on different aspects. In some cases, deep learning has better performance. In some cases, computer vision with deep learning, they overlap. And then, so scientists are trying all these methods all together. And what I'm trying to say is that the third myth that I'm presenting today is if you're classifying images, you're not doing artificial intelligence, because as the term suggests, artificial intelligence, you're not only classifying the image, you have to allow the machine to see the image as a human. And if you refer to Nick Bostrom's book, Superintelligence, he presents the multiple historical definitions of AI, and he did a very comprehensive study on which ones are sound and which ones are not. And the one I'm presenting to you today is a result of that work. It's not my work, but it's a result of that work. And I strongly believe in that. When not to use AI, like I mentioned, seriously overhyped and seriously underdefined. So many times we find ourselves hitting a nail with a sledgehammer, and obviously marketers referring to AI for any system that involves processing any kind of computation. So we have to be very careful of what we do in that aspect. So what am I saying? I'm saying that for policy, for healthcare, for trade, for econ, data democracy and data openness is the most important measure and framework that would inject a new value system with a number of actions, and in the book I present the number of actions that need to be taken in different domains, such as healthcare and psychology, to take better decisions and to be able to build better models and to be able to differentiate between a Labradoodle and a fried chicken. Like a deep learning model would, in some cases, not if you pass the wrong types of images to it, which is again, it hits on the idea of what is AI and what is not. A data democracy not only will help us with policy making, but it will also help us with differentiating between a puppy and a bagel. It will also help us differentiating between a sheepdog and a mop. If you're seeing my screen, I enjoy looking at these images. I have many more, but I'll stop here. A difference between a Chihuahua and a Muffin, and no offense to your favorite dog, but in summary, a framework for a data republic is required to create a set of values and actions that benefit all the citizens, benefit all of us as their owners, the public, for better policy, for more accountability, for more visibility within any country of this world. And this is an ongoing pursuit. It's an ongoing pursuit. I strongly encourage you to join us in this pursuit. This is the cover of the book. This is our Turing Research logo. Obviously, Alan Turing, the founder of AI, is the name of our research group. And I also want to invite you to MDPI. This is an open multidisciplinary journal that our team is editing, and I would like to invite you to, if you're doing any kind of research or any kind of writing, I would like to invite you to publish with us and submit a paper to this AI for Policy journal. I want to end with the dedication of the book and the reason why we chose this cover, this robotic baby cover. And the dedication says, to the sons and daughters of the digital prison, as we may give you freedom through a data democracy, you must not inherit our thoughts or our ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Feras. I appreciate it. That's a great talk. It really brought up a lot of interesting ideas. So as we go forward with questions, we already have one question in the chat that I'll throw out there to get it started. And Feras, if you could please turn on your camera again so that we can see you respond to the questions, that would be great.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, this first question is from Igor. With regard to the so-called reproducibility crisis with scientific publications, are you arguing that making journal articles and data freely available would help improve reproducibility?
Yes. So making data available is key here. So the issue with reproducibility is that when you have an experiment, there are so many different variables that come out play, where you have multiple predefined setup for the environment. You know, where are you performing this experiment? What types of machine? What types of data are you collecting? And so, if you change anything in an experiment, you'll get different results, right? So sharing that data set and justifying why you use that data as well. Some journals are starting to ask for that. Most journals now are asking for a data availability section, and I highly encourage that. But we're still, again, baby steps, because it certainly takes a lot to reproduce an experiment. And in the world of science, you are not rewarded for taking a paper, getting its data, and reproducing the experiment to argue against or with that experiment. Because most scientists aim to publish themselves and present new ideas and attack a new field of research and so on. So so this is not only a technical issue where authors and scientists have to publish their data. It's also a science culture issue where scientists should be rewarded for re-executing experiments to prove or disprove such experiments. So so science has a major crisis, and that's lack of openness, lack of reward for reviewing. If any of you have done any paper reviewing or peer review reviews for any journal, you know that it's a free service. You work so hard to review a paper, and obviously you don't get paid, you don't get rewarded, nothing, right? You can you do the worst job or the best job, and it's the same thing. And so that is certainly a major crisis where in most journals it's that way. And so scientists don't get rewarded for reviews. They don't share the right data sets when they publish a paper, and also they don't get rewarded for re-executing experiments. And so, yes, but certainly the first step and the easiest, lowest hanging fruit is publishing the data set with the paper so everyone can access it and look into it.
So I'll open it up to others. If you want to unmute, ask a question, then mute. I'll give you a couple of minutes. If not, I'll throw another question out there. All right, then I'll go at it and give you guys everyone an opportunity to think about their questions. So kind of on the other side of the scientific paper problem that we just talked about, really this is the argument that many people threw against Aaron Swartz in his approaches. If you do, and it's nice that you used oil and coal as a comparison.
Yeah.
You still have the slide up of data as no oil. How do you deal with companies who really do view data as their raw resource for developing innovations? Just as you said, we want to be able to have image recognition to be able to separate a bagel from a dog. But the company is interested in maintaining the scarcity of their data because that's what brings them value. But if we open up the borders and allow everyone to have all of their data and have access to all the same data, that value disappears. Or is that a bad assumption? Is there a way that you can keep an economy going with open data?
No, you are absolutely right. So that's certainly valid. Where there are no calls of sharing, say, top secret confidential government data, or even obviously companies' data for profit and so on. That's certainly never the pursuit here. The pursuit is for, if you are Facebook and if you are Twitter, or if you are collecting data on individuals, if you're a business where you're willingly participating in a business deal, then obviously, sure, I mean, no one has right to that data. But if you're sharing your personal life online, and in Europe, there's the right to be forgotten, right? Where if you go through a divorce and you don't want to have the pictures of your, ex-wife or husband online, or if you go through bankruptcy and you don't want to have your financial information, you want to be forgotten, you want to have a new start, you want to have a clean slate. In many countries of the world, you don't get to have that. So for that specific point, yes, you are perfectly right, and that's a debate. Again, my role is not to discuss what should society do in terms of how much data we should have access to, but opening this up for discussion and getting to a democracy on agreeing what needs to be done. And if you want to control your data, you have the right to control the data. That's really the idea. So same thing with governments. No government will share its obviously confidential data or top secret data, and that's not even required at this point. But unfortunately, we'll see even public data is far from being shareable at this point. If you look through government agencies' websites and you look at how they share data, it's mostly they still share data in PDFs and emails and such, non-machine readable forms. And so, in the US, while we might be ahead in so many aspects in data science, we're still behind in openness and compared to other countries. And so, this is obvious. This doesn't touch a business, doesn't touch a profit or revenue or any of that. It's mainly for purposes of openness.
Thank you for that answer. I appreciate it. Any other questions? We had a question come up. Can you talk a little bit about the Bezos and on the hearing that you brought up at the beginning of the major tech companies and how they're managing?
Yeah. I mean, I certainly invite you to watch it. I mean, honestly, I can say my personal opinion of what happened there is that no question was answered. All the answers were the best non-answers I've ever heard in my life. And so, that was obviously, that was by design, and for once you see bipartisanship. You see both sides asking the same questions toward the same direction. I think it's starting to become evident that our data freedoms, our internet liberties are at stake here, and they're under so much. They're in danger. And so both sides of the aisle were equally asking questions about privacy, monopoly, and on and so on. But again, I think we're a long way to go. As always, policy is behind technology. Technology is faster. It grows much faster than technology, and so than policy. Sorry. And so I feel like this is a transitional time where eventually policy will catch up with technology and technological rules and regulations, and we'll have more GDPR, like in like European GDPR and other places. I'm not saying it should be the same model; it could be different. I mean, the US has a different setup, different system, and that's fine. But as an academic and as scientists, we look at data lifecycle issues, and we declare that those issues are major and they affect our pursuit of. And in the book, I call them truth, context, and bias. Those are the three pillars of a data democracy, where we're pursuing truth by understanding context and avoiding bias. Those are the three aspects that we aim to accomplish through such democracies. But yeah, I certainly invite you to watch that hearing. It's pretty hilarious. So.
Great, thank you. Any additional questions? We have just a few minutes left. Okay, well, with that, I again want to thank you for your time. I appreciate it. It's a wonderful discussion. I'm very much looking forward to reading your book, and please stay in touch and continue engaging with us. I know there's lots of crossover with the work that we do in our research and scientific support to the government. So this is helpful.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. And, I hope we were doing this in person, but still, it's a great opportunity. I thank you all. Sterling, thank you for hosting it, and Denise and Jeff and everyone else, thank you for taking care of all the details. Happy talking to you all the time, and good luck at Noblis.